My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent 43 years building what I thought was the perfect family. 5 days ago, everything I believed about love, sacrifice, and blood ties crumbled when my own son, Daniel, and his wife, Sarah, literally pushed my husband, Robert, and me off Eagles Peak, a 120-foot cliff overlooking our family's legacy vineyard. As I lay there in the darkness, broken and barely breathing, I heard Robert's trembling whisper, "Margaret, don't move. Play dead. They can't know we survived." But the fall wasn't the worst betrayal. The worst was what Robert confessed to me in those final moments before our son's footsteps faded away, a secret so devastating it would make any mother wish she had died on impact. Let me start from the beginning. From the night everything unraveled in front of 50 people who thought they were celebrating love and legacy. The golden light of the Sonoma Valley sunset streamed through the French doors of our family's estate, casting warm shadows across the mahogany dining table that had hosted 5 decades of family celebrations. Tonight, 50 guests filled our home, their voices creating a symphony of celebration that should have filled my heart with joy. Instead, I felt a strange unease I couldn't quite name. Among the crowd were neighbors who had watched us plant our first vines, when Daniel was just a baby and Emily wasn't even born yet. Business partners who had helped us weather the wine industry's ups and downs. Friends who had celebrated Emily's medical school acceptance with champagne and tears of joy, and who had later stood beside us at her funeral. I smoothed my burgundy dress, the one Emily had helped me pick out just 3 months before her death 5 years ago. We'd spent an entire afternoon at Nordstrom in San Francisco, laughing and trying on dozens of options while Emily insisted that I needed something that would make Dad's jaw drop at your next anniversary party. She'd held up dress after dress, rejecting them with theatrical sighs until she found this one. "Mom, this is it," she'd said, her eyes lighting up with that infectious enthusiasm that made everyone around her feel more alive. "This color brings out your eyes, and the cut is sophisticated without being stuffy. You're not old, you're distinguished. There's a difference." The memory was so vivid I could almost feel Emily's presence beside me. I could almost hear her laughter mixing with the voices of our guests. The fabric still carried the faintest hint of her perfume Chanel number 5. The same fragrance I'd worn on my wedding day because it had been my mother's favorite. Emily had discovered the connection when she was 16 and had adopted it as her signature scent. Sarah moved through the crowd like a practiced hostess, her smile never wavering. She wore a stunning black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, her jewelry catching the light from the crystal chandelier Robert's parents had given us as a wedding gift. To an outside observer, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, attentive, charming. She remembered birthdays, asked about grandchildren, offered sympathy for recent losses and congratulations for new achievements. But I had begun to notice things about Sarah that troubled me. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The calculated nature of her charm, as if every gesture and word had been rehearsed. The subtle way she steered conversations away from topics that might reflect poorly on Daniel or herself. Tonight I watched her deflect questions about Daniel's recent frequent trips to Las Vegas with practiced ease, turning the focus instead to their plans for expanding the family business. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade through silk, sharp and commanding in the way that only years of courtroom experience could perfect. My 37-year-old son stood at the head of our dining room, his Harvard law degree practically radiating from his perfectly pressed Armani suit, a $3,000 piece of clothing I knew he'd charged to our business account as a professional expense. Sarah, his 33-year-old wife, positioned herself beside him with that practiced smile she wore whenever cameras or important people were present, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Something in Daniel's posture made my stomach clench with dread. I'd seen this stance before, during his high school debate championships, during his law school moot court competitions, during the few times I'd watched him argue cases in court. It was the posture of a man who believed he held all the cards and was about to play the winning hand. But this wasn't a debate or a legal proceeding. This was supposed to be a celebration of love and family. As you all know, we're here to celebrate my parents' 45th wedding anniversary, Daniel continued, his voice carrying that lawyer's cadence that could make a compliment sound like an indictment. He paused, letting his eyes sweep the room with the calculated timing of a performer who understood the power of dramatic silence. 45 years of marriage, of building this incredible vineyard from nothing, of creating a legacy that has employed dozens of people and brought joy to thousands of wine lovers across the country. The room filled with appreciative murmurs and the gentle clinking of glasses. Someone called out, "Hear, hear!" from the back of the room, and I saw several of our neighbors nodding with genuine warmth. But something in Daniel's expression, a cold glitter behind his practiced smile, made my blood run cold. But as we celebrate this incredible milestone, Sarah and I also want to share some wonderful news about the future of the Montgomery legacy. My stomach clenched. The way he said wonderful news carried the same tone he'd used as a child when he was about to confess to breaking something valuable while simultaneously explaining why it wasn't really his fault. After much consideration and planning, we're thrilled to announce that my parents have decided to transfer ownership of the Montgomery estate to us, effective immediately. Daniel's smile was perfect, practiced, the same smile he'd worn in his law school graduation photos and his wedding pictures. This will ensure the vineyard's continued success for generations to come, while allowing Mom and Dad to enjoy their golden years without the stress of daily operations. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers as if my hand had forgotten how to hold it, crystal shattering against the hardwood floor Robert had refinished himself just 5 years ago. The sound seemed to echo in what had suddenly become a tomb-like silence, each fragment catching the light as it scattered across the floor like broken dreams. Golden liquid spread across my burgundy dress like spilled sunlight, but I barely noticed. This was the first time I was hearing about any transfer. We had never agreed to this. We'd never even discussed it. In 45 years of marriage, Robert and I had made every major decision together, and the idea that we would transfer ownership of our life's work without consulting each other was absurd. But here was our son, announcing it to 50 people as if it were already decided, already done. Of course, Daniel continued smoothly, his voice never wavering despite the fact that his mother was clearly in shock. As part of this transition, we'll be moving Mom and Dad to Sunset Manor, one of California's premier senior living communities, where they can receive the care and attention they deserve in their later years. 50 pairs of eyes stared at me, some with pity, others with the morbid curiosity people reserve for watching someone's world collapse in real time. I could hear the whispers starting, low and urgent. Poor Margaret? I had wondered about her lately. Seemed a bit confused at the grocery store last week. Such a shame when the mind goes, at least they have Daniel to look after them. The word dementia floated through the air like a death sentence. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell everyone that Daniel was lying, that my mind was as sharp as it had ever been, that this was nothing more than an elaborate theft disguised as concern. Instead, I sat frozen as conversations erupted around me. Medical advice from amateur experts, horror stories about other families' experiences with aging parents, well-meaning suggestions about the silver lining of professional care. "Oh, Margaret," whispered Mrs. Henderson from next door, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy as she leaned forward in her chair. "Dementia is such a terrible thing. My mother went through the same decline. She seemed perfectly fine one day, and then suddenly, she was accusing the neighbors of stealing her mail and forgetting the names of her own grandchildren. How tragic that it should happen to someone so accomplished, so vibrant. Don't worry, Mom. Sarah's voice was honey over razor wire as she placed a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder, her French nails digging just slightly into my skin through the fabric of my dress. Her fingers pressed just hard enough to feel like a threat, her touch somehow managing to be both possessive and dismissive. "We'll take excellent care of the vineyard." Emily would have wanted that, don't you think? She always said family legacy was everything. My daughter's name in her mouth felt like blasphemy, like watching someone desecrate a grave. Emily had indeed talked about family legacy, but she'd meant preserving our values, our integrity, our commitment to doing right by the community and the land. She'd never meant using those words to justify theft and betrayal. Daniel nodded gravely, playing his part with the skill of someone who had clearly rehearsed this moment. Emily always understood the weight of responsibility that comes with success. She would have wanted us to make the hard decisions, to put Mom and Dad's safety above our own emotional attachments. She was wise beyond her years, always thinking about what was best for the family as a whole. The party ended in a blur of awkward goodbyes and whispered conversations that I wasn't meant to hear but caught anyway. I stood by the door like a ghost at my own funeral, accepting sympathetic hugs and murmured condolences for a condition I didn't have and a decision I'd never made. Fragments of conversation drifted past me. Poor things. Probably for the best. Such a shame. At least they have Daniel to look after them. I had no idea it had gotten so bad. She seemed fine at the farmer's market just last week. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I'd spent decades building, another shovel of dirt thrown on the grave of my dignity. These people, our friends, our neighbors, our business partners, were watching the public execution of Margaret Montgomery, and they thought they were witnessing an act of mercy. That's when I knew I had to find out what Robert was hiding from me. The fear in his eyes, the way he'd avoided meeting my gaze all evening, the tremor in his hands when Daniel spoke. Something was terribly wrong, and it went far deeper than forged documents and stolen money. After the last guest departed, I found myself alone in Robert's study, staring at the framed photographs that lined his desk. Emily at 8, grinning gap-toothed in her first riding outfit. Daniel at graduation from Harvard, his smile not quite reaching his eyes even then. Our wedding photo from 1979, when the future felt infinite and full of promise. "How could you let him do that to us?" I whispered when Robert finally joined me, his shoulders hunched like a man carrying an invisible weight. He closed the door behind him with the slow deliberation of someone preparing for surgery. "Margaret, there's something you need to know." I turned to face him, and that's when I saw the manila folder in his hands, its edges worn from handling. The tab read, "Property Transfer, Montgomery Estate," in Daniel's precise handwriting. "He's been planning this for 6 months," Robert said, his voice barely audible. "The power of attorney documents, the medical evaluations declaring us incompetent, the psychiatric reports claiming we're suffering from dementia. He forged everything." My legs gave out and I sank into the leather chair that had been Robert's sanctuary for 30 years. The vineyard? Gone. Transferred to his name 2 weeks ago, backdated to appear legitimate. He's already in negotiations to sell to Blackstone Ventures for $15 million. But it was the look in Robert's eyes that truly terrified me. Not anger, not grief, but fear. Pure, primal fear of our own son. I should have trusted that instinct. Instead, I decided to confront Daniel directly. I confronted Daniel the next morning. He was in Emily's old room, now converted into his temporary office sitting, behind her antique writing desk, like he owned it, which I realized with a sick twist in my stomach, he now legally did. "I know what you've done," I said, standing in the doorway. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "I'm protecting the family assets, Mother. This is what's best for everyone. I'm 67 years old, not 97. My mind is perfectly is it?" His eyes finally met mine, and I saw a coldness there that made my blood freeze. "You're getting old, Mom. You make mistakes, like trusting the wrong people, like not understanding that sometimes family has to make hard choices." He stood up then, walking around the desk with predatory grace. "You want to know the truth, Mother? You and Dad enabled my problems for years. But Emily? Emily got everything she wanted, no questions asked. We gave you every opportunity, Daniel. And then you cut me off." His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "When I really needed help, you chose her over me." Well, now it doesn't matter what you choose. That's when I realized Daniel wasn't just stealing our money. He was stealing our freedom. The changes started small. Our credit card stopped working at the grocery store. The keys to our Mercedes disappeared overnight. When I called our bank, a cheerful voice informed me that Mr. Daniel Montgomery had assumed control of all family accounts for estate planning purposes. But even in those early days, I noticed Daniel's unexpected gestures of kindness. He would bring me coffee in the morning, asking with genuine concern about my sleep. Sarah would rub my shoulders when I seemed tense. "We're family," she would say warmly. "We'll get through this difficult time together." I wanted to believe them. When Daniel explained that the asset transfers were temporary protective measures, I let myself trust him. Within a week, Sarah had hired a round-the-clock nurse named Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 50s, who followed us from room to room with a clipboard. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Daniel has asked that you not go outside without supervision," she said when she found me in the garden, "for your own safety, like Emily would have wanted." But Robert's behavior told a different story. I began noticing small signs that something was terribly wrong. He would flinch whenever Daniel entered a room, his hands trembling. During family dinners, Robert barely spoke, instead stealing nervous glances at our son. Something about Emily's death was haunting my husband, and I was determined to find out what. 2 weeks into our captivity, I knew I had to find out what Robert was hiding. Hidden behind his tax returns, I found Daniel's credit card statements, months of gambling transactions that took my breath away. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses over the past 3 years. But that wasn't the worst discovery. In the back of Robert's filing cabinet, I found a folder labeled Emily Case, Private 2019. Inside were newspaper clippings about Emily's death, but also bank statements showing monthly payments of $5,000 to Wilson Consulting for the past 5 years, 60 payments totaling $300,000, and there were incomplete torn letters in Robert's handwriting that started, "I need to tell you," but were never finished. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. The first payment to Wilson was made 3 days after Emily's funeral. For 5 years, Robert had been paying someone to keep quiet about something connected to our daughter's death. As I dug deeper through Robert's hidden files, I found evidence that shook me to my core. Bank transfer records showing Daniel had been embezzling from our family business for years, and Robert knew about it. His handwritten notes tracked every theft, every cover-up, every lie. My husband hadn't just been hiding Daniel's gambling debts. He'd been helping our son steal from us while paying someone to keep an even bigger secret buried. I never imagined the payments were buying silence about murder. I was a mother investigating her son's gambling addiction and my husband's financial secrets, not a detective uncovering a crime scene cover-up. Armed with this terrifying knowledge about Daniel's massive debts and Robert's mysterious payments, I decided to fight back through the legal system. It was a mistake that nearly cost me everything. My attempt to fight back through the courts was a disaster, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. Daniel had prepared for everything, anticipated every move I might make. I hired James Rodriguez, one of San Francisco's most respected elder law attorneys, using the last of my hidden emergency money. But Daniel was always one step ahead. Before Rodriguez could file our first motion, Daniel presented the court with evidence that destroyed my credibility so thoroughly that even I began to question my own memories. The courtroom felt like a mausoleum as I sat in the defendant's chair, watching my own son systematically destroy my credibility. Daniel spoke with the polished authority of a Harvard-trained attorney, painting a picture of a loving son trying to protect his deteriorating parents. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow, "my mother has become increasingly paranoid and delusional over the past year. She believes Sarah and I are trying to steal from her, but we're only trying to protect her from herself." He submitted medical records that showed my declining mental state records I'd never seen, from doctors I'd never visited. Daniel's hired psychiatrist, Dr. Amanda Richardson, testified about my obvious cognitive decline and persecution complex. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt something inside me die. What died was the last vestige of the woman who had once believed that love and family meant something. In its place, something harder and colder began to grow. The eviction notice came on a Thursday. We had 72 hours to vacate the home we'd built together. Sarah supervised the packing with military efficiency, discarding 43 years of memories into donation boxes. "You'll be much happier there," Sarah said, wrapping our wedding china in a newspaper with careless haste. "No responsibilities, no stress." I watched her handle Emily's jewelry box, a music box that played Chopin's Nocturne, and something snapped inside me. "Put that down." Sarah's eyes hardened. "I don't think you're in a position to make demands, Margaret. That belonged to my daughter. Your dead daughter who won't be needing it." Sarah's smile was pure venom. "Besides, it'll look lovely in my new bedroom, the master bedroom that used to be yours." The music box shattered against the hardwood floor, its delicate mechanism scattering like Emily's dreams. I knelt among the pieces, trying to gather what could be salvaged, when Daniel's voice cut through my grief. "Clean that up, Mrs. Patterson. Mother's having another episode." That evening, Daniel made an offer I should have known was too good to be true. "Before you leave," he said, his voice almost gentle, "would you like to take one final walk around the property? For old time's sake?" Robert and I exchanged glances. After weeks of cruelty, this small kindness felt like a trap. But what choice did we have? Daniel and Sarah led us up the winding path behind the house, past the vineyard where Robert had taught Daniel to prune grapevines, past the old oak tree where Emily had hung her tire swing. The path ended at Eagle's Peak, a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the entire Sonoma Valley. "Remember when Emily fell off her bike near here?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a strange note. "Such a clumsy girl. Always having accidents." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. Robert stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine. "Actually," Daniel said, turning to face us with that lawyer's smile, "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." The last thing I saw before the push was Sarah's face, twisted with satisfaction as she whispered, "This should have happened years ago." And then we were falling into darkness, toward what should have been our deaths. The world tilted and I was flying, tumbling through empty air with Robert beside me, his hand still clutching mine. Time stretched like taffy as we fell, long enough for me to think about Emily, about all the dreams that would die with us on the rocks below. We hit a ledge 20 feet down from the cliff's edge, our bodies crashing into the narrow outcropping with bone-jarring force. Above us, I could hear Daniel and Sarah's voices, sharp with barely contained panic. "Are they dead?" Sarah hissed. "They have to be." "It's over 100 feet to the bottom." Daniel's voice was steady, controlled. "No one survives a fall like that, especially not at their age." "But what if someone finds the bodies? What if there's an investigation?" "There won't be an investigation. 2 elderly people with documented dementia wandering alone near a cliff at night after being told they're losing their home. Tragic accident. Case closed." Their footsteps faded as they made their way back down the path, leaving us in darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. "Margaret." Robert's voice was barely a whisper, thick with pain and blood. "Don't move. Play dead. They can't know we survived." I lay perfectly still, cataloging my injuries by feel. My left arm was definitely broken. My ribs screamed with every breath, and something warm was trickling down my forehead. But I was alive. We were both alive. "Robert," I whispered back, "we need to—" "Margaret, stop. I have to tell you something. About Emily, about why Daniel is doing this." His voice cracked, and I heard 5 years of guilt pouring out in the darkness. Emily didn't die in an accident. Daniel killed her. But that wasn't the end of Robert's confession. It was only the beginning. The words hung in the air like poison. Above us, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the human tragedy playing out on this narrow ledge. 5 years ago, Robert whispered, Daniel had gambling debts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. The final time he asked for help, we said no. We told him we were done enabling his addiction. Instead, we gave Emily's research fund another $100,000 for her medical school project. The irony was bitter as copper in my mouth. We'd thought we were teaching Daniel responsibility while investing in Emily's bright future. Instead, we'd signed our daughter's death warrant. Emily found out about his gambling debts through her own investigation. She discovered he'd been stealing from the estate accounts, forging signatures, and embezzling from the business. Robert's voice broke. She confronted him that night, said she was going to call the police unless he confessed and got help. I could picture it. My brilliant, headstrong daughter standing up to her older brother, believing that justice and family loyalty could coexist. I found Emily at the bottom of the stairs, Margaret. She was already gone. The fall had broken her neck instantly. Daniel was standing there, shaking, crying like a child. "It was an accident, Dad," he kept saying. "I didn't mean to push her so hard." She was going to destroy our family, call the police, ruin everything. I looked at my son, broken, terrified, begging me to help him, and I couldn't bear to lose both my children in one night, so I helped him stage it as an accidental fall. I called 911, moved some furniture, made it look like she'd tripped and hit her head on the marble floor. I've been paying Wilson ever since to keep the real evidence buried, the forensic details that didn't match our story, the fact that the blood spatter patterns were wrong, the angle of impact that suggested she was pushed rather than fell. The confession hit me harder than the fall. For 5 years, I'd mourned my daughter as a victim of cruel fate. Now I learned she'd been murdered by jealousy and greed, and the man I'd trusted with my heart had helped cover it up. But even as Robert's confession shattered what remained of my world, I realized that I had been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. "Robert," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the shock, "there's something you need to know too." "I may not have known about Emily's murder," I whispered, my voice growing stronger despite my injuries, "but I wasn't sitting idle these past months." Robert turned his head toward me, confusion replacing some of the anguish in his eyes. "While you and Daniel thought you were so clever, taking our assets and planning our demise, I was 3 steps ahead on the financial front." I shifted slightly, reaching into my jacket pocket with my good arm. "Everything Daniel thinks he's stolen? The bank accounts, the property transfers, the business assets? All of it was moved to offshore trusts months ago. What he's been stealing is pocket change enough to make him feel successful, not enough to matter." Robert made a sound that might have been laughter if we weren't lying broken on a cliff ledge. "The $15 million sale will never go through." Blackstone Ventures is actually a shell company owned by my attorney. When Daniel tries to collect, he'll find himself under federal investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and now attempted murder. I pressed the button on the satellite emergency beacon that I'd been carrying for weeks. Somewhere above the clouds, satellites were triangulating our position, sending rescue coordinates to every emergency service in Northern California. I may have been naive about the murder, Robert, but I knew my son was a thief and a liar. I've been recording conversations, documenting his crimes, building a case that would force him into treatment and save our family's legacy. I just never imagined the case would include murder. But Robert couldn't answer, because that's when I heard the helicopter rotors cutting through the night air. The emergency beacon had worked. Help was coming, and soon the world would learn the truth that I had been searching for without even knowing it. What happened next would change everything. The helicopter arrived 47 minutes later, its searchlight cutting through the darkness like a sword of judgment. As the rescue team rappelled down to our ledge, I could hear other sirens in the distance, police cars, ambulances, federal agents responding to the emergency beacon's priority distress signal. "Ma'am, try not to move," the paramedic said as he stabilized my neck. "You're going to be okay." "Can you tell me what happened?" "My son and daughter-in-law pushed us off this cliff," I said clearly, loudly enough for the body camera on his uniform to record every word. "They tried to murder us for our inheritance." As they lifted us up on stretchers, I caught a glimpse of the Montgomery estate below. Police cars surrounded the house, their red and blue lights painting the vineyard in carnival colors. In the distance, I could see Daniel and Sarah on their knees in our driveway, hands zip-tied behind their backs. For the first time in months, I smiled. They brought Daniel to the hospital 3 hours later, still in handcuffs, flanked by 2 federal agents. My room was private, sterile, filled with the steady beeping of machines monitoring my recovery. "Mom." His voice was different now, smaller, desperate. "I want to confess. About everything. About Emily, about the fraud, about tonight." I looked at him for a long moment, this stranger wearing my son's face. "You already told me everything I needed to know," I said quietly. "You told me when you pushed your father and me off a cliff. You told me when you murdered Emily 5 years ago." Daniel's face crumpled. "Please, Mom, I'm still your son. I'm sorry. You stopped being my son the day you murdered Emily." And that was the last time I ever spoke to Daniel Montgomery. The story broke on every major news network within 24 hours. Wine Dynasty matriarch survives son's murder attempt. The Montgomery family murders. $50 million inheritance turns deadly. From my hospital bed, I watched Daniel and Sarah's perp walk on every channel. Sarah tried to blame everything on Daniel's gambling addiction. Daniel confessed to everything: Emily's murder, the years of embezzlement, the attempted murder of his parents. But it was the footage of their arrest that satisfied something deep and primal in my soul. Daniel, the Harvard-educated lawyer who had spent his life believing himself untouchable, stumbling down our front steps in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions. "This wasn't supposed to happen!" Sarah screamed at the cameras. "We planned everything perfectly." The irony was beautiful. In trying to silence us forever, they had ensured that their crimes would be broadcast to the world. 3 months later, I sat in the front row of Judge Patricia Williams' courtroom, my arm still in a sling, but my spine straight with purpose. Robert sat beside me, frailer than before, but present. We would face this final chapter together. The prosecution had built an airtight case. The emergency beacon's GPS data proved our location at the time of the accident. Security cameras I'd had secretly installed around the estate captured Daniel and Sarah returning to the house, discussing how to dispose of our belongings before the bodies were discovered. But the most damning evidence was Daniel's own confession, delivered in a breaking voice to a courtroom packed with reporters. "I killed my sister Emily Montgomery on March 23, 2019, he said, staring at his hands. "I pushed her down the stairs during an argument about money. My father helped me cover it up, and I've been paying hush money to keep the truth buried ever since." Following the trial, Daniel received the harshest penalty: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the premeditated murder of Emily and attempted murder charges against Margaret and Robert. His accomplice Sarah was sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy and attempted murder. Robert received an 8-year sentence for accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice in covering up Emily's murder. Notably, Detective Marcus Wilson, who was supposed to uphold justice, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for corruption, accepting bribes, and obstruction of justice. Finally, the court ordered that all assets be restored to Margaret, who appears to be either a surviving victim or Emily's rightful heir. Daniel received his sentence without emotion, as if some part of him had already accepted this fate years ago, but the story doesn't end there. Justice in the courtroom was only the beginning. I visited Emily's grave for the first time since learning the truth about her death. The headstone read, Emily Rose Montgomery, beloved daughter and sister, 1992 to 2019. Soon there would be an addendum. Murdered by her brother, justice delayed but not denied. I'm sorry I never knew you were murdered, my darling, I whispered, placing white roses on the grass above her coffin. I'm sorry I lived for 5 years thinking it was an accident, never knowing you needed justice. But now everyone knows the truth, and your killer will never hurt anyone again. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard Emily's laughter, bright and pure and finally free. From there, I went to confront those who had stolen so much from us. 2 months after the trial, I did something that the authorities, my lawyer, and even Dr. Santos had advised against. I visited Daniel in prison. The drive to San Quentin State Prison took me through some of the most beautiful landscape in Northern California, rolling hills dotted with vineyards, charming small towns with their neat rows of Victorian houses, families of cyclists enjoying the perfect autumn weather. It was the kind of day Emily would have loved, the kind of day she would have insisted we pack a picnic and drive to the coast just to watch the waves and talk about her dreams for the future. The contrast between the natural beauty of the journey and the ugliness of my destination was not lost on me. San Quentin squatted on the edge of San Francisco Bay like a concrete cancer, its walls topped with razor wire that gleamed in the afternoon sun. The parking lot was filled with beat-up cars and nervous families, most of them women with children who clutched stuffed animals and homemade cards for fathers they saw only on visiting days. The visiting room was stark and cold, filled with the murmur of desperate conversations between inmates and their families. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Children's laughter echoed off the concrete walls as they played with fathers they barely knew, while wives and mothers tried to maintain some semblance of normal family interaction in this most abnormal of places. Daniel appeared smaller somehow when the guards escorted him to our table, his expensive suits replaced by orange prison garb that hung loosely on his diminished frame. His hair had grown out, losing the precise styling that had been his signature. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his skin had the pale, unhealthy pallor of someone who rarely saw sunlight. But it was the change in his demeanor that struck me most. The way he kept his hands folded in his lap, his eyes downcast, his shoulders hunched, as if he were trying to make himself invisible. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking like a 12-year-old boy's rather than a 37-year-old man's. "I didn't think you'd come. I hoped you would, but I didn't think. After everything I did." I studied his face, looking for any trace of the son I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally for 37 years. "I almost didn't," I said honestly. "I've been trying to decide for weeks whether there was any point in seeing you, whether there was anything left to say." "I'm glad you came," he whispered. "I've been writing you letters, but I knew you probably wouldn't read them. I've written hundreds of them, actually. Apologies, explanations, confessions. I fill up notebooks with things I want to tell you, and then I throw them away because nothing I could say would be enough." "You're right," I said simply. "Nothing you could say would be enough." The words hit him like a physical blow, and I saw him flinch, but I wasn't here to offer comfort or absolution. I was here to deliver a message that needed to be said face to face, to ensure that Daniel understood the full scope of what he had destroyed. I came to tell you something, Daniel, I continued, my voice steady and cold. I came to tell you that Emily knew. His face went white, and for a moment I thought he might faint. What do you mean? The night you killed her, she wasn't just confronting you about the embezzlement. She had already found evidence that you'd been stealing from us for years. She had bank records, forged signatures, documentation of every fraudulent transaction dating back to your first year of law school. She wasn't just going to turn you in for the current theft, she was going to expose everything. Daniel's hands began to tremble on the table, and I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. Mom, please. She came to me first, you know. I leaned forward, making sure he could see the pain in my eyes, the pain he had caused. 3 hours before she died. She spread all the evidence out on my dining room table, the same table where we'd celebrated her acceptance to medical school, where she'd blown out birthday candles as a child, where our family had shared thousands of meals together. Daniel couldn't speak, could only stare at me with growing horror as I continued. She asked me what she should do. She was torn, Daniel, absolutely heartbroken about having to turn in her own brother. She kept saying, Mom, he's sick. He needs help, not prison. But if I don't stop him, he'll destroy himself and everyone around him. I paused, letting the weight of Emily's words settle between us. Do you know what I told her? Daniel's lips moved soundlessly, but no words came out. I told her that family comes first, that we should give you one more chance to make things right, that we should confront you together as a family and offer you help instead of punishment. My voice never wavered, never betrayed the emotion that was threatening to overwhelm me. I told my daughter to show mercy to her murderer. If I had told her to call the police immediately, if I had supported her instinct for justice over my hope for redemption, she would still be alive today. Mom, I never meant... Daniel's voice was a broken whisper, but I cut him off. She died because I believed in you, Daniel. Because I thought you were capable of change, capable of redemption. Because I loved you more than I loved justice. I leaned forward, my eyes boring into his. But you weren't just a thief and a gambler who could be saved with love and therapy. You were a murderer, waiting to happen. And when Emily offered you love and help and a chance to change your life, you chose to kill her instead. Daniel broke down completely, sobbing like the child he'd never really stopped being despite his Harvard education and expensive suits. I was so scared, Mom. The debts, the people I owed money to, they were going to kill me. They showed me pictures of what they'd done to other people who couldn't pay. Emily didn't understand how dangerous they were. Emily understood everything, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his sobs like a knife. She understood that you needed help. She understood that we loved you despite your flaws and your mistakes. She understood that addiction is a disease that requires treatment, not enablement. What she didn't understand was that you were capable of murder. I stood up slowly, looking down at my son for what I knew would be the last time. The man sitting before me in Prison Orange was a stranger, someone who happened to share DNA with the boy I had raised, but who had chosen to become something monstrous. You took my daughter from me, Daniel. You took Robert from me when you made him choose between his children. You took everything I cared about and destroyed it for money that you would have gambled away within months anyway. I picked up my purse, preparing to leave this place and never return. You robbed the world of 40 years of Emily's medical career, all the lives she might have saved, all the discoveries she might have made. You didn't just kill my daughter. You killed everyone she might have healed. Please, Mom, I'm still your son. Daniel's voice was desperate, pleading, broken. No, I said quietly, and the finality in my voice made him stop crying. My son died the night he killed his sister. You're just the man who wears his face. I walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. There's one more thing you should know. Emily's foundation has already saved 12 lives through our medical research funding. 12 young women who will become doctors because of the legacy your sister left behind. Every life they save, every patient they heal, every breakthrough they make in traumatic brain injury research, that's Emily's real revenge on you. She's still changing the world, still saving lives, still making a difference, while you rot in here. I could hear Daniel calling my name as I walked away, his voice echoing off the concrete walls like the cry of a lost soul. But I didn't turn around. I had said everything I came to say, and there was nothing left between us but the weight of his crimes and the memory of the children we used to be. That was the last time I ever saw Daniel Montgomery. 6 months after the trial, I visited Robert in prison. The visiting room was different from San Quentin, more like a cafeteria, but the weight of what had brought us here was just as heavy. Robert looked older, frailer, his hair completely gray. Prison had stripped away the last vestiges of the man who had once built a vineyard with his bare hands. "Margaret," he said, barely above a whisper, "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied. "I've spent months trying to decide if I could ever forgive you for what you did to Emily. For what you did to me." His eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But when I found Emily at the bottom of those stairs, when I saw Daniel standing there broken and terrified, I couldn't bear the thought of losing both my children in one night. So you chose him over her." "I chose the living over the dead," he whispered. I told myself I was protecting what was left of our family. I looked at this man I had loved for nearly half a century. "You weren't protecting our family, Robert. You were protecting a murderer. For 5 years, I mourned Emily as a victim of a tragic accident. And all that time, you knew she had been murdered by her own brother, and you did nothing. I was paying Wilson. You were paying Wilson to hide the truth, not to get justice." My voice rose. "Emily deserved justice, Robert. She deserved a father who would fight for her, even after death." Robert sobbed openly now. "What should I have done, Margaret? Send my son to prison?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "You should have called the police the moment you found her body." Because that's what Emily would have done. We sat in silence for a long moment. "Can you ever forgive me?" Robert asked finally. I considered the question carefully. "I forgive you for being weak," I said finally. "I forgive you for being a father who loved his son too much to see him clearly. But I will never forgive you for letting Emily's murderer sleep peacefully for 5 years while I cried myself to sleep, missing a daughter I thought died by accident." Robert nodded, accepting the boundary I was drawing. "What happens now?" "Now you serve your time. And when you get out, if you're still alive, maybe we can learn to be friends again. But we will never be husband and wife again, Robert. That died the night Emily did. I just didn't know it yet." I stood up to leave. "Detective Wilson was sentenced yesterday, 5 years for corruption. Emily's case helped bring down an entire network of police corruption." "He was just doing what I asked. He was taking bribes to pervert justice. Don't you dare make excuses for him, too." I looked at my husband for what I knew would be the last time. "Goodbye, Robert." As I walked away, I heard him call my name one last time, but I didn't turn around. 1 year after the trial, I stood in the same vineyard where this nightmare had begun, but everything was different now. The golden autumn light that had once illuminated our anniversary celebration now cast a different kind of glow over the landscape, one of renewal rather than nostalgia. The Montgomery estate had been transformed into the Emily Montgomery Medical Foundation, and the changes were breathtaking. Where our formal dining room had once hosted dinner parties and family gatherings, now stood a state-of-the-art research laboratory. The kitchen where Emily had baked cookies as a child had become a conference room where brilliant minds collaborated on breakthrough treatments. Every room held new purpose, new hope. The first class of Emily Scholars 12, brilliant young women who reminded me so much of my daughter, moved through the halls with the same determined energy Emily had possessed. I watched them through the windows of my cottage, these remarkable women who carried my daughter's spirit forward into the future. Dr. Maria Santos, the Foundation's director and a renowned expert in traumatic brain injury research, had become like a daughter to me. At 35, she possessed Emily's same fierce intelligence and compassionate heart. She had been working on TBI treatments for over a decade when I approached her about leading the foundation. "Mrs. Montgomery," she had said during our first meeting, "your daughter's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a call to action. If we can prevent even one family from experiencing what you've endured, then Emily's legacy will save lives for generations." Now, watching her guide the Emily Scholars through their research protocols, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since Emily's death. These young women, brilliant, dedicated, hungry to heal the world, they were Emily's true legacy. I had kept a small cottage on the property, a cozy 2-bedroom home overlooking what was once our vineyard. The main house now buzzed with the energy of young minds working to heal the world. The guest wing had been converted into dormitories for the scholars, while the upper floors housed administrative offices and smaller research labs. The Foundation's work was already showing promise. Dr. Santos had secured partnerships with major medical centers across the country. The first clinical trials for a revolutionary new treatment protocol were scheduled to begin within 6 months. 3 pharmaceutical companies had reached out about licensing opportunities for treatments developed in Emily's name. "Do you regret any of it?" Robert had asked during one of our final conversations before his sentencing, his voice heavy with the weight of everything we'd lost. I had considered the question seriously, standing in the same study where I'd first discovered the evidence of Daniel's crimes. The past year had cost us everything we'd thought we wanted: our son, our marriage as we'd known it, our faith in family bonds. But it had also given us something we'd lost the night Emily died: the truth, and with it, the chance to honor her memory properly. "I regret that I let love blind me to evil for so many years," I had said finally, my hand resting on Emily's medical school diploma, now framed and hanging in the Foundation's main lobby. "I regret that I didn't see Daniel's darkness until it was too late to save Emily, but I don't regret fighting back when it mattered most, and I don't regret using our pain to create something beautiful." The Foundation had also become a gathering place for other families affected by similar tragedies. Support groups met in the converted library, guest speakers, survivors of family violence, experts in financial elder abuse, advocates for justice reform, regularly addressed audiences in what had once been our formal living room. As darkness fell over the Sonoma Valley that first anniversary night, I walked through the halls of what had once been our family home. In the room that had been Emily's childhood bedroom, a young scholar named Jessica worked late into the night, analyzing brain scans and taking notes with the same careful precision Emily had always employed. "Excuse me," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. Jessica looked up, her eyes bright with the exhaustion of passionate work. "Mrs. Montgomery." "I'm sorry. I know it's late. I just got so caught up in this data set. The preliminary results are incredible." "Emily used to do the same thing," I told her, settling into the chair beside her desk. She'd work until 3 in the morning on her research, completely losing track of time when she discovered something exciting. Jessica's face lit up. Dr. Santos told us about Emily's work on pediatric brain trauma. Her undergraduate thesis was groundbreaking. She was going to change everything. "She still is," I replied, watching this brilliant young woman who was carrying Emily's torch forward. "Through all of you." I thought about the lesson Emily's death had finally taught me. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, mistake love for blindness, mistake family loyalty for unconditional protection from consequences. They learn too late that a mother's love can be both the gentlest and the most dangerous force on earth. And sometimes, justice delayed is still justice served. But more than that, sometimes the greatest justice is ensuring that tragedy becomes transformation, that loss becomes legacy, that death becomes a different kind of life. As I walked back to my cottage that night, I could hear the scholars talking and laughing in their dormitory, their voices carrying on the wind like music. It sounded like Emily's laughter, like the future she never got to see, but somehow helped create. 5 years later, the Emily Montgomery Medical Foundation has expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. We now fund over 200 scholarships annually and have established research centers at 12 major universities. Our breakthrough treatments for traumatic brain injuries have saved lives around the world. Daniel remains incarcerated, serving his life sentence. I'm told by the prison chaplain that he spends his days in the library, reading medical journals about traumatic brain injuries, perhaps finally trying to understand the brilliant sister whose life he stole. Sarah served 18 years before her early release. She vanished into obscurity, though her name will forever be linked to attempted murder when anyone searches for her. Some punishments write themselves. Robert died peacefully 2 years ago after serving 6 years of his sentence. His health never recovered from the stress of prison and guilt. I attended his small funeral service, not as his widow, but as Emily's mother. He had been my husband for 45 years, but that man died the night he chose to protect our daughter's killer. Detective Wilson died in federal prison during his 3rd year. 3 families whose murder cases he had corrupted sent flowers to Emily's grave on the anniversary of his death. His legacy became a cautionary tale taught in police academies about the price of corruption. I live quietly now in my cottage, watching each new class of Emily scholars arrive each fall. Their voices fill the research facility with hope and determination. Sometimes, on clear evenings, their laughter sounds exactly like Emily's, bright and fearless and full of dreams to heal the world. The question people ask me most is whether I feel any anger toward Daniel for what he took from us. The answer is simpler than they expect. You cannot steal what was never yours to take. He stole our money and our peace of mind, but he could never touch our love for Emily or our determination to honor her memory. That belongs to us forever, and perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. If you found yourself gripping the edge of your seat through this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts about Margaret's journey in the comments below. Do you think she made the right choices? Could you have forgiven what she forgave, or fought as fiercely as she fought? If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. For another story of hidden strength and unexpected justice, click the link that's appearing on your screen now. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths.